This is absolutely gigantic news. I mean, it's just been, ever since the election last year, it's just been a veritable torrent of good news, nothing but good news for XRP holders as it pertains to the actual XRP ecosystem. This is what, it's just another reason, add it to the pile, why I keep saying XRP is a very obvious and clear winner, early winner of the crypto space. We don't have to ask if XRP is going to make it. It already happened. And there's demand for this exact product. I mean, we're talking about a newly formed company that will be traded on Wall Street, on the stock exchange, and so people can literally buy the company, and then they get exposure to XRP. And the company does other stuff as well, but at its core, that's it. This is astonishing, and it's huge. Again, the largest public XRP treasury in history, the largest one that's public. Truly incredible stuff here. So I'm going to go ahead and run through all of the specifics as they're known to this point, and then I'm going to go ahead and run through why this matters to you if you're listening to this and you're an XRP holder. And there are a lot of reasons. A lot of reasons. Yes, this is absolutely fantastic news. I mean, talk about an increase in demand. It's just, everything has been going so perfectly for XRP holders ever since the election. It's the exact opposite of last market cycle when precisely everything went wrong. Led by the SEC nonsense. But here we are. We're better now. We're on the other side of things. History is obviously favoring us, and here we go. I did know something was coming. Here's a headline from Bloomberg, and I covered this at the time. This is from several days ago. Ripple Labs said to lead $1 billion fundraise for XRP Hoard. And so it was exciting, and we were waiting to get some specifics, and oh yes, now we have them. So let's go ahead and run through this brand new CoinDesk piece, and all this broke on Monday. A newly formed Nevada company says it will go public and build what it calls a large publicly traded XRP treasury through a merger with a blank check firm. Evernorth Holdings disclosed the plan in a press release Monday, saying it signed a business combination agreement with Armada Acquisition Corp. 2, AACI. If the deal closes, the combined company is slated to keep the Evernorth name and is expected to trade on NASDAQ under XRPN. So that'll be the ticker symbol for the company, Evernorth, XRPN. I like that. The companies are targeting the first quarter of 2026, subject to shareholder approvals and listing requirements. So folks, we're literally talking about regular everyday people who, even if they're not in crypto, they can buy shares in this company, Evernorth, a publicly traded company then, on NASDAQ. They can just go buy it, and then they have exposure to XRP, which materially impacts the supply and demand dynamics for XRP itself. Oh yes, it absolutely does. And there are a lot of people out there that will be interested if it's, they're already on whatever platform it is that they're using. And now there's just this new option. Yeah, all sorts of people who aren't in crypto are going to be very interested in that. Of course they are. And yes, you and I, we prefer to buy on cryptocurrency exchanges and engage in self-custody, sure. But we're not everyone. There are other people that have different interests and different things and different risk tolerances, so on and so forth. And so this is just opening another door for demand of XRP. It's huge. Anyway, piece continues. The release says the transaction is expected to raise more than $1 billion in gross proceeds, including a $200 million commitment from SBI. Other backers listed include Ripple, RippleWorks, Pantera Capital, Kraken, and GSR, with participation from Ripple co-founder Chris Larsen. And I will pause to note, Pantera Capital, they've been around for well over a decade. In fact, Pantera Capital is the first hedge fund in the United States to launch a Bitcoin fund, which they did back in 2013, and that was founded by Dan Moorhead. Dan Moorhead has been pro XRP for as long as I can frickin' remember. I mean, it was probably, I'd have to do a Google search to verify the timeline, but it was probably like 2019-ish, somewhere around there, where he said, hey, if you just fast forward into the future some amount of time, there'll probably be, whether it's a dozen, whatever he said, a small number of blockchains that are very that have just one. And he said, he predicted back then that XRP absolutely would be one of them. So to see his firm, Pantera Capital, involved here, not surprising to me in the least. Anyway, piece continues. Evernorth says most of the net proceeds will be used to buy XRP on the open market to build an institutional treasury, with the remainder earmarked for working capital and deal expenses. Class A shares of AACI that are not redeemed would convert 1-for-1 into Class A shares of Evernorth at closing. Evernorth pitches itself as a public vehicle that offers simple exposure to XRP while actively seeking to grow XRP per share over time. Rather than track the asset passively, the company says it plans to lend to institutions, provide liquidity, and participate in decentralized finance strategies to generate yield. So, folks, we're talking about increased utility. I'm going to circle around back to that, though. Evernorth is built to provide investors more than just exposure to XRP's price, CEO Ashish Burla said. As we capitalize on traditional yield opportunities and deploy into DeFi when appropriate, we intend to help mature that ecosystem. Our goal is to create returns for shareholders while reinforcing XRP's utility. And so I gotta say, I thought it was cool to see that Ashish Burla is the CEO here. He was one of the upper execs at Ripple, and he was actually one of Ripple's first employees ever. He was there just practically from the beginning, and he left in recent years as far as like a paid employee, but he stayed on the board at Ripple. And now with this, he's leaving the board of Ripple so that he can be the CEO over at this company, which I think is a pretty damn cool development. He's been around like just forever. So if you've been here for more than a few years, that name probably sounds familiar to you, and that's why. Anyway, beyond treasury activity, the company says it intends to run validators on the XRP ledger and use Ripple's RLUSD stablecoin as an on-ramp into XRP-based DeFi. It also highlights plans to support projects focused on payments, capital markets, and tokenized assets. Those initiatives, like the listing and capital raise, depend on the transaction closing and on market conditions. Yeah, that's a no-brainer, of course. Then they talk about people and governments. I'm going to skip through that. And then to wrap this piece up from them, right? What comes next? Both boards approved the deal, the company said. The outcome now turns on shareholders, votes, potential redemptions, regulatory review, and execution of the funding plan outlined in the announcement. If completed, XRPN would give public market investors exposure to XRP's price plus any incremental returns the firm can generate through lending, liquidity, and DeFi participation. So I'm optimistic this is going to go through. It would be disappointing and surprising if any of these people bungle this. These are highly competent people, and they wouldn't have gotten to this point if it weren't almost certainly going to go through. So it's going to happen. But I mean, look, let's cut to the chase here, right? Like, let's bring this home, if you will, and ask the most important question. What does this move mean for you as an XRP holder? Well, when an entity like Evernorth announces it's going to go public, to build a massive XRP treasury, and notes that net proceeds will primarily fund open market purchases of XRP, while also deploying it into lending and liquidity and DeFi strategies as outlined in the article here, we're seeing something. Something that will help to ensure the long-term success of XRP. It's safe to say. But of course, it's more than that, and I'm going to outline a number of reasons why. But just think about it. Like, even this much money, they say $1 billion. Understand over time, it could be much more substantial than that. But if you're considering the current price, like from one individual thing happening, $1 billion, that's a notable percentage of the XRP that's in existence going to a thing where it's effectively locked up. And yes, it's going to be used too for other purposes as outlined in the article, but you get the cut of my jib, right? This is just from one thing at one moment in time, and XRP's been around for over a decade. That's incredible to me. And so, first of all, this adds obviously structural demand to XRP. Of course, XRP has always had meaningful utility from the beginning. And, that's only increased over the years, but now it's even more obvious that XRP isn't just about trading it's trading, based on speculation or token flips, this and that. With a public vehicle committing to buy XRP, you now have the possibility of consistent accumulation from a visible source. So it could go way above $1 billion. And of course that in and of itself doesn't guarantee price spikes, but I'll tell you this, it matters. It materially impacts the supply and demand dynamics for XRP, and it sure as hell changes the narrative, especially bogus narratives that people with XRP derangement syndrome have been driving. XRP becomes an asset being treated by institutional strategy, not just by retail hype. This is where the big boys go, okay? And second, The fact that the vehicle is publicly listed, again with that ticker symbol I like, that XRPN, Evernorth, that means XRP is anchoring into capital markets, not just crypto markets, folks. And that helps in two really nice ways. One, it brings in new layers of potential investor types, traditional finance, not just crypto natives, of course, which I was alluding to earlier in the video. But, even that, like, that could help, broaden the buyer base for XRP indirectly, for obvious reasons. It's what I was talking about before. People are going to want exposure to XRP. And if they now have this option that wasn't available to them, they don't have to go to Coinbase. Yeah, a lot of people are going to find that appealing. And then two, it increases transparency and regulatory alignment around XRP use cases, which helps reduce a portion of, like, quote unquote, perceived risk for holders. So in some ways, it's similar to demand increasing for Bitcoin, since Michael Saylor's strategy, formerly MicroStrategy, since they buy so much of it. And in that, that fact that, that MicroStrategy, well, now Strategy, buys so much Bitcoin, that has driven demand for their stock, Strategy stock. Though, of course, it is true that recently stock's seen a little bit of a dive. There's no denying that. But man, it ran up drastically, didn't it? Very dramatically, after they really got their implementation going. And then third, the plan isn't just to hold XRP passively. As cited in the article, it's true. The announcement emphasizes active strategies, institutional lending, liquidity provisioning, DeFi participation. So that means XRP isn't just being accumulated. Again, it's being used. This is increased utility for XRP. And so for holders, that use case expansion, it's meaningful. Because let's be real. I mean, I'm assuming that a lot of you listening are like me. Like, you're interested in XRP because it does stuff, right? And if XRP weren't functionally useful, we wouldn't have spent all of these years accumulating it and hanging on to every development within the XRP ecosystem if it didn't actually do stuff. But it does stuff, and it has incredible technical attributes to boot, which is, well, I mean, that's what makes the utility possible, frankly. So yeah, that actually does matter to us. The more token has utility, the stronger the case for long-term value retention. That it's very obviously true. Even if short-term price action is volatile, just what happens if this chart is up and to the right. That's where the XRP chart is going, up and to the right. That's the truth of the matter. We just have to wait. Obviously, there's volatility. There are down years, so on and so forth. Even dramatic moves down. I've held XRP through a move that's over 90% down because I've been here since 2017. I've never sold a single XRP in my life. I understand what I hold. This is an incredibly rare opportunity in life. I understand that. And I know that you guys do too. Unless you're brand new and you're still learning, in which case, welcome to the party. Glad to have you here. But this is only going to get better, my friends. And fourth, very importantly, the news changes how you might think about risk and reward with XRP. So historically, a lot of the upside for XRP, of course, it's been tied to speculation. That's true of other coins too, including Bitcoin, Ethereum, so on and so forth. But it's tied to that. Regulatory outcomes, broad crypto momentum, no surprise there, right? But to be clear here, with this treasury model, you now have a new anchor story. If XRP adoption, infrastructure growth, institutional flows, that all progresses, XRP could absolutely benefit from both, token market upside and institutional asset class upside, which is huge. That's a huge piece of the puzzle. I think that matters as will ultimately the launch of multiple XRP spot ETFs. All of this actually matters. But anyway, so this means that, the boomer bust narrative, of course, it remains, but, you've got another dimension. It's infrastructure, sure, but plus institutional exposure. And that's why I keep insisting, like, this in conjunction with spot ETFs getting approved, my God. This can really flatten out the volatility, but continue to cause the chart to move up and to the right, basically. That's certainly what I would expect. Because, and the reason I say that is a lot of institutional money, it behaves different than the typical lemming retail speculator. So when you have more investors with cojones, you're not going to see as much volatility over time. And plus, on top of that, just the more investors there are in a space, the less volatile something's going to be anyway. The volatility, of course, is going to flatten out. It's easy to understand why. But this is just huge news, folks. Welcome to the big leagues, my friends. Yeah, I think we picked a frickin' winner here with XRP. I'm not a financial advisor. You should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say, all right? That would be a very, very, very bad idea.